You won't believe anything about what happened next. No one saw it coming, but it all began with a flat tire on a lonely stretch of road. David Lawson sat behind the wheel of his Cadillac, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The road stretched out ahead of him, deserted and quiet, flanked by tall grass swaying in the summer heat. His watch ticked away seconds he couldn't afford to waste. An important meeting loomed in less than an hour, yet here he was, stuck. He swore under his breath, eyeing the road before him. Then, without warning, the unmistakable thump-thump-thump of a flat tire broke the silence. "Perfect," David muttered, his voice laced with frustration. He pulled the Cadillac over to the side, kicking up a cloud of dust, his thoughts clouding with annoyance. The heat hit him the moment he stepped out of the car. He adjusted his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and knelt to inspect the tire. Shredded rubber peeled away from the rim, a useless, deflated mess. He glanced down the empty road. No one in sight. No signal on his phone either. Great. He cursed under his breath and tucked the phone back into his pocket, his eyes scanning the barren horizon. It was the kind of situation he wasn't used to. In his world, someone always took care of things like this: chauffeurs, assistants, or service crews. But here, on this rural stretch, it was just him and his useless flat tire. He let out a heavy sigh, the sweltering heat pressing in on him. Memories of his youth surfaced, the times he'd been stranded, left alone, ignored by passers-by. That bitterness lingered in the back of his throat as he stared at the broken tire, helpless. Then, just as the sun seemed to reach its peak, something caught his eye, a small figure moving toward him from the distance. David squinted, trying to make it out, a silhouette against the vast stretch of road, gradually coming into focus. It was a girl. She was no more than 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and a pair of worn-out sneakers. As she approached, David could see the determination in her eyes. "Hey, mister. Got trouble with your car?" the girl called out, stopping a few paces away from him. Her gaze was steady, focused on him as though she could see right through the frustration etched on his face. David hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, flat tire. And I don't exactly know how to fix it." The girl nodded, moving closer to him. She glanced at the shredded tire and then back at David. "My mom showed me how. I can fix it if you've got a spare." David blinked, the words hitting him harder than he expected. A kid, fixing a flat tire. "Wait, you can really do it?" David asked, his skepticism clearly showing. She gave him a small, confident smile. "Yeah, it's just a tire, mister. No big deal." She stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. "Spares usually in the back, right?" David was caught off guard, but with no other choice, he stepped aside and let her approach the back of the car. He watched as she opened the hatchback, found the tools, and began working without hesitation. For a long moment, David stood there, unsure of what to do with his hands. He wasn't used to this, watching someone else take charge of a situation he would normally handle. The girl worked quickly, twisting the wrench with a rhythmic clank, moving with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Finally, she stopped and looked up at him, wiping a bit of sweat from her forehead. "You all right there, mister? You look kind of pale." David straightened up, trying to recover his composure. "I'm fine, just not used to this kind of thing." The girl smiled again, her expression warm and genuine. "No problem. Just got to know where to look and how to get your hands dirty." David stood there, watching her finish up, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. When she stood up and gave him a thumbs up, signaling she was done, he was almost in disbelief. "All done," she said casually. David blinked, momentarily lost for words. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He held them out to her, his voice almost a whisper. "Here, for your trouble. I really appreciate it." But the girl only shook her head. "Nah, I don't need that. I just wanted to help. You looked like you could use it." David's hand hung there, awkwardly, the money still in his palm. He frowned, unsure of how to react. "No, really. I insist." But the girl just smiled, shook her head again, and started walking away. "Take care, mister. Good luck with whatever you're doing." She waved over her shoulder without looking back. David stood there, dumbfounded, as she disappeared down the road the way she had come. The bills were still in his hand. He let out a long, slow breath. The unease had only grown, gnawing at him. This simple act of kindness, without expectation of anything in return, felt strange to him. He wasn't used to this, to being on the receiving end of something like that. With a frown, David turned back to the Cadillac and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life, and he drove on. But his thoughts remained tangled in that brief encounter. The girl's smile, her refusal of money, the way she had walked away as if it were just natural. David glanced at his rearview mirror. Her figure was small, growing fainter with every passing second. The road stretched ahead, but in his mind, something had already shifted. What had just happened? And why couldn't he stop thinking about it? What happens next will surprise you. David can't let go of the mystery of the girl who helped him. What will he do when he decides to find her again? Stay tuned. Don't miss what happens next. David couldn't get her out of his mind. The girl who had fixed his tire and vanished without a trace. It wasn't just her skill, though that alone was remarkable. It was her demeanor, the confidence in her stride, the warmth in her smile. She had done what no one else in his world ever did. She helped without expecting anything in return. The memory lingered as he sat in his office the next day, staring at his laptop screen. Numbers and charts swirled across the screen, but his mind wasn't on them. Instead, it kept drifting back to that stretch of road, the summer heat, and the girl's steady hands as she worked on his car. Mr. Lawson? His assistant's voice broke through his thoughts. The board meeting is about to start. David blinked, shaking himself out of his reverie. Right. Thanks, Andrea. I'll be there in a minute. She nodded and slipped out, leaving him alone again. He stared at the spreadsheet on his laptop, but the numbers didn't make sense anymore. A gnawing sense of incompletion sat in his chest, growing heavier with each passing minute. Before he knew it, he was reaching for his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad. He didn't even know her name, let alone how to find her. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Why does this matter so much? But deep down, he already knew. She had reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, humanity, a connection that went beyond money, status, or power. And it unsettled him. David stood abruptly, his chair rolling back. Andrea, he called out, stepping into the hallway. His assistant appeared instantly, notepad in hand. Yes, sir. Reschedule the board meeting. I've got something to take care of. Andrea hesitated, her pen hovering over the notepad. Are you sure? They're expecting. I'm sure, David said, his voice firm. I won't be long. The road stretched out before him again, but this time, David was determined. He retraced his route from the day before, his eyes scanning every turn, every roadside house, every small intersection. The Cadillac hummed smoothly beneath him, its repaired tire gliding effortlessly over the pavement. He drove past the spot where they had met. The empty field still swayed under the same golden sun. He slowed the car, peering down the narrow paths leading away from the main road. One of them had to lead to her home. After nearly an hour of searching, David spotted a small house set back from the road. It wasn't much, a single-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. But in the yard, he saw her. The girl. She was kneeling by a bicycle, working on what looked like another flat tire. David pulled over, parking on the side of the dirt driveway. He stepped out of the car, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. As he approached, she looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. Recognition flickered in her expression. "Oh, it's you," she said, standing up and brushing her hands on her jeans. "Your car holding up okay?" David nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. "It is. Thanks to you." She shrugged. "Wasn't a big deal." "To you, maybe," David said. He paused, glancing around the yard. "But it was to me." The girl tilted her head, studying him. "So, why are you here?" David hesitated. He had been asking himself the same question. "I guess I just wanted to say thank you. Properly." "I already told you. I didn't do it for money," she said, crossing her arms. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I know," David replied. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. Her eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise passing across her face. Me? David nodded. You reminded me that people can still do good without expecting anything in return. That's rare. The girl's gaze softened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she smiled. Well, maybe you needed to remember that. David chuckled softly. Maybe I did. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the rustle of the wind. Finally, David reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to her. If you ever need anything at all, call me, he said. I mean it. The girl looked at the card, then back at him. You don't have to do that. I know, David said, but I want to. She hesitated, then tucked the card into her pocket. All right, thanks. David smiled, feeling a strange sense of peace as he turned back toward his car. But as he reached for the door handle, her voice stopped him. Wait. He turned to see her staring at him, her brow furrowed slightly. My name's Elena, she said. Just so you know. David's smile widened. It's nice to meet you, Elena. I'm David. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Drive safe, David. As he climbed into the Cadillac and drove away, he couldn't help but feel that something important had just begun. He didn't know what it was yet, but he was certain of one thing. This wasn't the end of their story. Who is Elena, and what's her story? David's curiosity won't let him leave things at this. What he discovers next will change both their lives forever. Don't miss Chapter 3. The following day, David found himself at his desk, staring blankly at the array of emails that demanded his attention. The memory of Elena, her confident, no-nonsense demeanor, had planted itself firmly in his mind. She was unlike anyone he'd met before, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their brief encounter was the beginning of something significant. But who was she? And what kind of life did she lead? Unable to concentrate, David picked up the phone and called his assistant. Andrea, I need you to clear my schedule for the day. Again? Andrea's voice was tinged with concern. Is everything all right, sir? Yes, I just have a personal matter to attend to. David hung up, grabbed his keys, and headed back to his car. This time, he wasn't going to leave things to chance. He was determined to learn more about the girl who had reminded him of the simple kindness that the world often overlooked. Elena's home looked even smaller and more worn in the light of day. The porch sagged slightly under her weight as she sat on the steps, engrossed in a book. She didn't notice David pull into the driveway until the sound of his car door closing caught her attention. Back already? She asked, closing her book and setting it aside. Her tone was neutral, but the slight arch of her brow betrayed her curiosity. David approached with a sheepish smile. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Elena shrugged. Not really. Just reading. He gestured toward the book. What's the title? She held it up, revealing a battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's for school, she explained, though the enthusiasm in her voice suggested she enjoyed it more than she let on. A classic, David said, nodding appreciatively. Harper Lee has a way of capturing human nature, doesn't she? Elena tilted her head, studying him. You've read it? Many times, David admitted. It's one of my favorites. Her expression softened slightly, but she quickly masked it with a casual shrug. It's all right, I guess. David chuckled. So, do you always downplay your interests, or is that just for my benefit? Elena smirked, clearly amused despite herself. Maybe I just don't like giving strangers too much credit. David raised his hands in mock surrender. Fair enough. But I was hoping you might let me be less of a stranger. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? You're not here to offer me some weird scholarship or anything, are you? David laughed, though the edge in her voice didn't escape him. No scholarships, I promise. I just wanted to learn more about the person who helped me out. She eyed him warily for a moment before gesturing to the porch steps. All right, sit down, but I'm not promising anything. As they sat together, David learned bits and pieces of Elena's life. She lived alone with her mother, a hard-working nurse who often pulled double shifts to make ends meet. Money was tight, and Elena had taken it upon herself to help wherever she could. whether that meant fixing bikes for neighborhood kids or picking up odd jobs after school. Mom says I should focus on my studies, Elena admitted, her voice carrying a hint of frustration. But it's hard to concentrate when you know the electricity bill is overdue. David nodded thoughtfully, his respect for her growing with every word. She wasn't just resourceful. She was resilient in ways most people her age couldn't fathom. "What about your father?" he asked gently. Elena's expression darkened, and she looked away. "Not in the picture." David didn't press further, sensing it was a sensitive topic. Instead, he changed the subject. "You know, you remind me a lot of myself when I was younger." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Were you also fixing strangers' cars in your free time?" "Not exactly," David said with a laugh. "But I did grow up in a small town. My family wasn't wealthy, and I had to work hard for everything I have now." Elena's skepticism was evident, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "So, what made you rich?" David hesitated, considering how to explain the winding road that had led him to his success. A combination of luck, hard work, and meeting the right people at the right time. "But mostly, I think it was my willingness to take risks." Elena seemed to mull this over before responding. "Sounds nice. But most people don't get those kinds of chances." "That's true," David admitted. "And it's one of the reasons I'm here. I want to give back, to help people who might not get those chances otherwise." Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. "So, you're here to help me?" David shook his head. "No, I'm here because I want to know you. What you've already done for me means more than you realize." For the first time, Elena looked genuinely taken aback. Her tough exterior seemed to falter, and for a moment, David caught a glimpse of the vulnerable teenager underneath. "Well," she said finally, her voice softer than before, "I guess we'll see where this goes." David smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had come here seeking answers, but he'd found something far more valuable, a connection that had the potential to change both their lives. The sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen echoed through the small house as Elena's mother, Monica, prepared dinner. Elena had introduced David to her mother with an air of nonchalance, as if wealthy businessmen dropped by their humble home every day. David sat awkwardly at the worn dining table, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the faded tablecloth. Monica, still in her scrubs from a long shift at the hospital, glanced at him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "So, Mr. Sterling," Monica said, setting a plate of food in front of him, "Elena tells me you were having car trouble." "Yes, ma'am," David replied politely. "And I was lucky enough that your daughter came to my rescue." Monica's brow furrowed as she sat down. "Elena has always had a knack for solving problems, though I usually wish she'd focus more on school and less on everything else." Elena rolled her eyes but didn't argue, instead focusing on her plate of food. David hesitated, unsure of how much he should say. "I can see why you'd want that, but from what I've seen, she's incredibly resourceful. It's a rare quality." Monica gave a small, tired smile. "She is. But resourcefulness doesn't always pay the bills, Mr. Sterling." "Please call me David," he said. "And I completely understand. I grew up in a similar situation. It's not easy trying to balance everything." Monica's expression softened slightly, but she quickly returned to the matter at hand. "So, David, what brings you back here? It's not every day someone like you takes an interest in someone like us." David chose his words carefully. "Elena reminded me of someone I used to know, someone who believed in helping others without expecting anything in return. I wanted to express my gratitude properly." "Gratitude?" Monica echoed, her skepticism returning. "Yes," David said firmly. "I don't believe in letting good deeds go unnoticed." Elena looked up from her plate, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "You don't have to make it a big deal, you know? I wasn't expecting anything." "I know you weren't," David said gently, "and that's what makes it all the more remarkable." Later, after dinner, David stood on the porch, the cool evening air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Elena joined him, her arms crossed as she leaned against the railing. "You didn't have to say all that stuff to my mom," she said. David turned to her. "Why not? It's the truth." She sighed, staring out at the quiet street. People like you. You come in, say some nice words, and then leave. Meanwhile, we're still here, trying to figure out how to make it to the next month. Her words stung, but David didn't let it show. I get it. You've had to deal with a lot on your own. But I'm not here to make empty promises, Elena. I'm here because I see something in you. Elena glanced at him, her expression guarded. And what exactly do you see? David smiled faintly. Potential. You're smart, determined, and resourceful. I think you could do great things if you had the right opportunities. She scoffed. Opportunities don't just fall into people's laps. No, they don't, David agreed. But sometimes, someone can open a door for you. The question is, would you walk through it? Elena didn't respond right away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, she said, I don't know. Maybe. David nodded, deciding not to push further. Fair enough. Just think about it. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elena's words were as much a challenge as they were a plea. She didn't trust him yet, and he couldn't blame her. But he wasn't about to give up. Will David find a way to break through Elena's walls? Can he convince her to trust him enough to accept his help? The hum of the engine filled the Cadillac as David navigated the quiet streets back to his hotel. The night air carried a sense of unease, Elena's guarded words replaying in his mind. She was right, in a way. People like him, wealthy, privileged, often dipped briefly into lives they didn't truly understand, offering help that felt more like charity than genuine care. But this wasn't about easing his conscience. David had seen a spark in Elena, a drive that reminded him of his younger self before success had dulled the sharp edges of his ambition. He had made up his mind. He was going to open a door for her, whether she trusted him or not. The next morning, David sat in the hotel's grand lounge, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. His assistant, Margaret, had been summoned for an early meeting. She arrived with her usual air of efficiency, tablet in hand, her sharp eyes scanning him for the agenda. What's on the docket today, Mr. Sterling? She asked, settling into a chair opposite him. David leaned back, setting his coffee down. We need to talk about a new project. Margaret raised an eyebrow. A new project? You have a pretty full plate already. This one's different, David said. It's personal. Margaret sighed. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Go on. David smiled faintly. I met someone yesterday, a young girl named Elena. She helped me out when I had car trouble. She's sharp, resourceful, and determined, but she's stuck in a situation that limits her potential. And you want to help her, Margaret deduced, her tone cautious. Yes, David confirmed. I want to offer her a scholarship, something that could cover her education, maybe even an internship at one of our companies when she's ready. Margaret tapped a few notes on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. It's a generous idea, but are you sure this is the right approach? People can be wary of sudden help, especially if it feels too good to be true. David nodded. I've considered that. That's why I want to talk to her and her mother about it directly. I'll explain everything and make it clear that there are no strings attached. Margaret tilted her head. It's not just about how you present it. It's about understanding what they really need. Maybe the scholarship is the right call, but don't assume you have all the answers just yet. David sighed, appreciating her insight. You're right. Let's set up a time for me to meet with them again. I want to do this the right way. Later that afternoon, David arrived back at Elena's house, a folder in hand. Monica greeted him at the door, her expression wary but polite. Elena's in the back, she said, stepping aside to let him in. In the backyard, Elena sat on the grass with a sketchbook, her pencil moving rapidly across the page. She looked up as David approached, her eyes narrowing slightly. You're back, she said, her tone neutral. I am, David replied, taking a seat on the steps leading to the yard. And I wanted to talk to you and your mom about something important. Elena raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. David opened the folder, pulling out a neatly typed document. I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday. And you're right. Opportunities don't just fall into people's laps. But I'd like to offer you one anyway. Elena frowned. What kind of opportunity? A scholarship, David said simply. It would cover your education expenses, and give you a chance to focus on your goals without having to worry about the financial side of things. And if you're interested, there's also the possibility of an internship with one of my companies in the future." Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I see potential in you," David said honestly. "And because I've been where you are, feeling like the odds are stacked against me. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most, and it changed my life. I want to pay it forward." Elena's grip on her pencil tightened, her gaze dropping to the sketchbook. "This sounds too good to be true." "I get that," David said, "and I don't expect you to trust me right away. That's why I want you and your mom to take your time to think it over. Ask as many questions as you need." She didn't respond immediately, her focus shifting back to her drawing. Finally, she muttered, "I'll think about it." David smiled, sensing that this was the most he could hope for at the moment. Will Elena open herself up to this unexpected opportunity, or will her skepticism keep her from taking the leap? The sound of Monica's voice carried through the house as Elena sat at the kitchen table, the scholarship proposal lying untouched before her. She had spent the past hour staring at the crisp white paper, the words swimming in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her mom had been pacing since David left, muttering to herself as she tried to process what had just happened. "Elena, this is huge," Monica said, her hands on her hips. "Do you even realize what this could mean for you? For us?" "I know, Mom," Elena replied, her tone even. "Then why are you just sitting there like it doesn't matter?" Monica's voice rose, the weight of her emotions finally breaking through. "It's not that it doesn't matter," Elena said quietly, her eyes fixed on the paper. "It's that it feels strange. People don't just show up and offer stuff like this for no reason." Monica's expression softened as she sat across from her daughter. "Elena, I get it. Life hasn't exactly been full of miracles for us. But sometimes, good things happen. Maybe this is one of those times." Elena chewed on her lip, her doubts swirling. What if it's not? What if there's some catch we don't see yet? Monica sighed. "That's why we'll be careful. We'll ask questions, make sure everything's above board. But honey, we can't afford to let fear hold us back. Not when someone's offering a way out." Elena looked up at her mom, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe, but trust wasn't something she gave easily. The next day, David sat in his office, watching the clock. He had left the ball in Elena and Monica's court, but the waiting was harder than he'd anticipated. Margaret walked in, setting a stack of files on his desk. "Still thinking about the scholarship?" she asked, glancing at his distracted expression. "Can you blame me?" David replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's not every day you meet someone who makes you rethink your priorities." Margaret smiled faintly. "You know, not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have driven off and never looked back." David shrugged. "Maybe I'm just trying to make up for lost time. Or maybe you're just proving that people can still surprise each other," Margaret said before heading back to her desk. Later that evening, there was a knock at David's door. When he opened it, he was met by Monica and Elena, both looking cautious but resolute. "We've talked about it," Monica said, holding a worn leather folder in her hands. "And we'd like to hear more about your offer." David stepped aside, ushering them into the cozy living area. He gestured for them to sit, then poured glasses of water before taking a seat across from them. "I'm glad you came," David said, "and I want to be as transparent as possible. If you have any questions or concerns, now's the time to bring them up." Monica opened the folder, pulling out a notebook filled with handwritten questions. "We do have some questions," she said firmly. David smiled, appreciating their thoroughness. "Ask away." For the next hour, they discussed every detail, how the scholarship would work, where the funding came from, and what strings, if any, were attached. David answered each question patiently, making it clear that his intentions were genuine. By the end of the conversation, Monica's shoulders had relaxed, and even Elena seemed less guarded. "This could really change everything," Monica said, her voice filled with awe. "It could," David agreed, "but only if Elena wants it. No pressure." Elena studied him, her eyes searching for any hint of deception. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said softly. David's smile widened. "I think you just made the best decision of your life." Elena stood on the front steps of the school, clutching the acceptance packet David had delivered the day before. The prestigious institution's logo gleamed at the top of the documents, an emblem of opportunity and change. Despite her initial reservations, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement beneath her lingering doubts. "Don't look so nervous," Monica said, giving Elena's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've got this, baby. You deserve every bit of this." Elena managed a faint smile. "It just doesn't feel real. Like I'm dreaming, and I'll wake up any second." Monica pulled her daughter into a quick hug. "Sometimes dreams are just life reminding you what's possible. Now go show them what you're made of." Elena took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the front doors, leaving the world she knew behind. David was sitting in his car a block away, watching as Elena disappeared into the school. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, his mind racing with hopes and concerns for her. He had spent years building his empire, but rarely had he felt as personally invested in anything as he did now. Margaret's voice interrupted his thoughts through the car's Bluetooth. "How did it go?" she asked. "She went in," David said. "But it's not about today. It's about whether she can stick it out, handle the pressure, and believe she belongs there." "She will," Margaret said confidently. "You saw something special in her, and so will everyone else." David sighed. "I just hope I'm not setting her up to fail." Inside the school, Elena was immediately struck by the polished hallways and the hushed conversations of students in pristine uniforms. Everything felt so foreign, like she'd stepped into a different world. "Hey there," a girl with curly blonde hair and a warm smile said as she approached. "You must be new. I'm Rachel. Need help finding your way?" Elena hesitated, unsure if the kindness was genuine, but Rachel's open expression eased her nerves. "Yeah, that'd be great," Elena replied. "I'm Elena." Rachel pointed down the hall. "Orientation is in the library. Come on, I'll show you." As they walked, Rachel chatted about the school, her favorite classes, and upcoming events. Elena listened, grateful for the distraction. "So, where are you from?" Rachel asked. Elena faltered for a moment, wondering if she should gloss over her modest background, but something told her that if she was going to make this work, she needed to be honest. "Southside," she said simply. Rachel's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "That's cool. I bet it's a lot different here, huh?" "You could say that," Elena replied, her tone wry. "Well, if you ever need anything, let me know," Rachel said as they reached the library. "Everyone's a little overwhelmed at first, but you'll get the hang of it." Elena nodded, her apprehension easing slightly as she stepped into the massive library. That evening, David received a call from Monica. "She made it through her first day," Monica said, her voice tinged with relief. "That's good to hear," David replied. "But," Monica added, "she told me some of the kids were already asking questions about where she's from, how she got in." David's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't have to explain herself to anyone. I'll make sure the school understands that." Monica's tone softened. "David, she'll be fine. She's tougher than she looks. But this is her fight now. She needs to prove to herself that she belongs." David paused, realizing Monica was right. "You're a good mom, Monica. And you're not so bad yourself," she replied with a smile in her voice. Later, as Elena sat at the kitchen table reviewing her class schedule, Monica placed a hand on her shoulder. "Proud of you, baby," she said. "Keep your head up, no matter what." Elena smiled faintly. "I will, Mom." But as she looked over the list of demanding courses and thought about the unfamiliar faces she'd encountered, she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly ready for the challenges ahead. The next few days passed in a blur. Elena navigated her new life at the prestigious school like a fish trying to swim upstream. Every interaction, every conversation, felt like a test she wasn't sure she was ready to take. The whispers, the sideways glances, and the uncomfortable silence that sometimes filled the air when she entered a room were constant reminders that she was different, an outsider. On the third day, she found herself standing in front of a grand classroom door, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the handle. She had already seen the whispering cliques and the gleaming smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But none of it mattered now. She had made a promise to herself that she would survive this, She would prove them wrong. Elena stepped inside. A few heads turned, but the room fell back into its rhythm as the teacher began calling names. Elena's heart raced. She wanted to melt into the background, disappear from the attention, but she couldn't. Not anymore. The teacher, Mrs. Devereux, was in her 50s, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone. She glanced over at Elena. "You must be Elena," she said, her voice cold but not unkind. "We're glad to have you here. Take a seat anywhere." Elena nodded and made her way to an empty desk in the middle of the room. She sat down, trying to focus on the lesson, but the gaze of her peers still lingered. Every word she wrote seemed like it was under a microscope. Halfway through the class, a girl with long, blonde hair leaned over the edge of her desk. "So, Elena," she said, her voice laced with curiosity, "how did you end up here?" Elena's pen froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this place is, well, it's different, right?" the girl said, her smile too wide to be sincere. "You don't exactly seem like the usual type of student." Elena's blood boiled, but she forced a smile. "I guess I'm not your usual type," she said coolly. The girl laughed softly, a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I was just curious. But hey, it's none of my business." The bell rang, signaling the end of the period. Elena gathered her things quickly and rushed out of the classroom, her heart pounding in her chest. David sat at his desk, his phone vibrating on the corner. He had been waiting for news, and the call from Monica confirmed his fears. "Mom said some girl talked to Elena today," Monica said, "but she wasn't very nice about it." David leaned back in his chair, a wave of frustration washing over him. "I told her it wouldn't be easy, but this isn't what I wanted for her." "I know," Monica replied, "but you can't protect her from every bump along the way. She's going to have to fight through this on her own." David sighed deeply, his fingers drumming on the desk. "I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Monica. Maybe I should pull her out. Maybe this isn't the world for her." Monica's voice softened. "No, you gave her the opportunity, David. You gave her the chance to change her life, and she's not going to let it slip away." David stood and walked to the window, his eyes narrowing on the cityscape below. The weight of his decisions felt heavier now, as if every choice he had made for her was closing in. He had promised her the world, but was he really giving her the chance to thrive in it? Later that evening, Elena sat at the dinner table, her plate untouched. Monica noticed the quiet tension in the room and glanced over at her daughter. "What happened today?" she asked softly. Elena looked up, her eyes tired. "Just the usual. Some people think I don't belong." Monica reached out and took her hand. "Baby, don't listen to them. You have every right to be there. You've earned it." "I don't know if I can do it, Mom," Elena whispered. "It's too much. They're all so different, and I feel like I'm just pretending to fit in." Monica squeezed her hand tighter. "You're not pretending, Elena. You belong. And if they can't see that, it's their problem, not yours." Elena wiped her eyes quickly, forcing back the tears. She had come this far, but was it really enough? Would she ever truly fit in? David sat in his living room later that night, his thoughts heavy with his daughter's struggles. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The line clicked, and a voice answered. "Mr. Lawson." "Mr. Harris," David replied. "I need your help. My daughter's going through something, and I don't know how to handle it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the voice spoke again. "I think I know exactly what she's going through." The following morning, Elena woke up early, the echoes of her conversation with her mother still lingering in her mind. She had spent the night lying awake, wrestling with her fears, doubts, and the crushing weight of expectations. She had promised herself that she would make it through this school, make it through the judgment, and rise above it all. But the question kept nagging her. Would it be enough? Downstairs, the smell of pancakes filled the air, but Elena wasn't hungry. She sat at the kitchen table, her eyes glazed as her mother moved around the room, preparing breakfast with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. "Elena, honey, you okay?" Monica asked, her voice gentle, yet full of concern. "I'm fine," Elena replied, not looking up. She didn't have the energy to explain how she felt, or how she didn't feel at all. Monica set a plate in front of her, but Elena pushed it aside. I'm not hungry, Mom. I just need to get through today. Monica sat down across from her. I know it's hard, but you're tougher than this, Elena. I've seen you push through things that would have broken most people. This school, this place, it's nothing. You can handle it. Elena didn't respond. She wasn't so sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. The school bell rang, the same familiar chime that signaled the start of another day. Elena entered the halls with a deep breath, her backpack weighing heavy on her shoulders, her heart even heavier. It was as if the world around her was in slow motion, and the glares, whispers, and side glances followed her like a shadow. Her first class was English. As she entered the room, Mrs. Devereux glanced up from her desk, her eyes locking with Elena's. Elena, please take a seat, Mrs. Devereux said with a tone that seemed both welcoming and curt at the same time. Elena nodded and made her way to an empty desk at the back, her eyes scanning the room as she walked. Several students were already whispering. She could hear their hushed voices, the silent judgment in the air. She sat down and tried to ignore it, focusing on the front of the room. But then, the girl from yesterday, the one with the too wide smile, turned around. Her name was Rachel, and she was one of the more popular girls at school. Elena had known girls like her before. They had a way of making you feel small without ever saying a word. So, Elena, Rachel said, her voice overly sweet, I heard you're from the wrong side of town. Is that true? Elena's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She didn't answer immediately, just stared at Rachel, weighing her words carefully. Don't give her the satisfaction. Don't let her win, she thought. But Rachel wasn't done. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering into a mock whisper. You know, people like you don't usually make it here. What are you going to do when it gets too hard? When they finally realize you don't belong? Elena's hands balled into fists, and for a moment, she considered ignoring her, walking away, letting Rachel's words slip past her. But she couldn't. Not this time. I belong here, Elena said, her voice steady, louder than she had intended. And you don't get to decide that. Rachel looked taken aback, but before she could respond, the bell rang, signaling the start of class. The tension in the air hung thick for a moment, but then the focus shifted to the lesson, and Rachel turned back around, leaving Elena to breathe in the brief relief of silence. After school, Elena found herself walking home alone again. The day had dragged on, each minute stretching longer than the last. As she passed the park near her house, she noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench. It was Mr. Harris, the man her father had called the night before, the one who had promised to help. Elena stopped short, her footsteps faltering for a moment. Mr. Harris looked up from the bench as she approached, his dark eyes studying her with the kind of wisdom that seemed to transcend time. Hello, Elena, he said softly, his voice comforting in its familiarity. How was your day? Elena shrugged, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Same as usual. People just don't want me here. He nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. I understand. But you know, sometimes it's not about what they think of you. It's about what you think of yourself. She sat down beside him, the sun beginning to set in the distance, casting long shadows across the park. How do you do it? Elena asked, her voice tinged with frustration. How do you keep going when everyone's telling you you don't belong? That you're not good enough? Mr. Harris smiled, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. You fight, not just for others, but for yourself. You have to know your worth, even when no one else sees it. You see, they can try to tear you down, but they can't take away who you are. Elena's mind raced, trying to absorb the weight of his words. But it's hard. I'm not like them. I don't have what they have. I feel like I'm just pretending. Mr. Harris placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture both firm and kind. There is no them and you, Elena. There is only us. You are as deserving as anyone else to stand in that room, to sit at that desk, to be seen. Don't let them make you feel small. His words struck her deep, and for the first time since she had stepped into the school, Elena felt a flicker of hope stir inside her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't just pretending. Maybe, just maybe, She could do this. That night, as Elena lay in bed, her mind replaying Mr. Harris's words, something inside her shifted. She realized that the power to change things wasn't just in her circumstances, it was in her. She could change her own narrative. She could rewrite the story of who she was and who she would become. And tomorrow, she would do just that. The next morning, Elena woke up with a sense of determination she hadn't felt in a long time. As she stood before the mirror, adjusting her school uniform, she felt a shift within her. She no longer saw the girl who was trying to fit in. Today, she saw a young woman who was ready to face whatever came her way. She grabbed her backpack and headed downstairs, her mother already at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. Monica looked up and gave Elena a knowing smile. "You're up early," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that Elena hadn't realized she'd been missing. "I feel like today's different," Elena replied, her heart swelling with an unspoken confidence. "I'm going to face them head-on." Monica raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Elena said with a resolve that surprised even herself. "Today's the day I stop running." The school day started off just like any other. As Elena entered the hallways, she could feel the eyes of the students on her, the whispers beginning to circle as they caught sight of her. But this time, instead of shrinking, she stood a little taller, walking with purpose, her chin raised high. In her first class, English, she sat down at the desk, taking her usual spot in the back. Rachel, the girl who had tried to bait her the day before, was already there. But today, Elena didn't let the girl's presence shake her. When Rachel turned around to look at her, Elena returned her stare, unwavering. "Is something on your mind, Rachel?" Elena asked, her voice calm but assertive. Rachel seemed taken aback for a moment, clearly expecting Elena to shrink away. But instead, Elena held her ground, eyes locked with Rachel's, challenging her to say something. Anything. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Rachel, with a tight smile, turned back around to face the front. Elena couldn't help but feel a small victory, though she didn't let it show. The day passed in a blur of lessons and interactions, but nothing felt as heavy as it had before. Elena found herself more present in the moment, her mind focused on the lessons rather than the side glances and whispers. By lunch, she had even found a moment to talk with a few girls from her class who had, until now, barely acknowledged her existence. "Hey, Elena," one of them, Sophia, said, looking at her with a friendly smile. "I've been meaning to ask, how are you doing? You know, with everything?" Elena paused, caught off guard by the question. She wasn't used to people asking after her, at least not in a way that seemed genuine. "I'm okay. Better than before, actually." Sophia nodded, her expression softening. "You know, I think it's really brave how you've handled everything. I can't even imagine what it's like, but you seem stronger than I thought." Elena didn't know how to respond to that. She hadn't expected sympathy, but the fact that someone had seen through the facade, recognized the strength in her, left her feeling seen. By the time school was over, Elena had made it through the day without incident. No more whispers, no more stares, at least not the ones that cut deep. When the bell rang to signal the end of the day, Elena walked out of the classroom with her head held high, her stride steady and sure. But as she walked to the bus stop, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Mr. Harris, sitting on a bench near the school's entrance. He looked up as she approached, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice full of interest. Elena paused in front of him, a proud smile spreading across her face. "It went better than I thought it would." Mr. Harris chuckled softly. "I knew it would. I told you, didn't I? They can't take what's yours, Elena." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. It was true. She had faced her fears, and though the world wasn't going to change overnight, neither was she. She was learning to fight back, not with anger, but with grace, resilience, and an unshakable belief in her worth. That evening, as Elena sat in her room, doing her homework, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. Things wouldn't be easy. She knew that. The journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready for them. She was ready to prove to herself that she belonged here, that she had the right to stand tall and unapologetic. The words from Mr. Harris echoed in her mind. You fight for yourself? And that was exactly what she was doing. Elena closed her notebook, looked out the window, and for the first time in a long while, smiled. Tomorrow, she would wake up and face the world, not as someone trying to fit in, but as someone who was finally standing in her own light. The next morning, Elena awoke to the sound of rain tapping against her window. It was a quiet, peaceful sound that contrasted with the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Today felt different, not just because of the weather, but because she was determined to carry the confidence she had found the day before into this new day. She was no longer going to be a passive player in her own life. After a quick breakfast, she grabbed her backpack and headed out the door. Her mom was already gone to work, and Elena, as she walked to the bus stop, couldn't help but feel an odd sense of freedom. The oppressive weight of fear, that constant worry of what people thought of her, seemed to have lightened. The journey ahead might still be difficult, but at least now she knew she wasn't alone. She arrived at school a few minutes early, the usual hum of students buzzing around the hallways. Today, however, she didn't feel like a stranger in a crowd. She wasn't a silent observer anymore. She was part of the pulse of the school. As she walked past the locker rows, she noticed a few more glances, but they weren't the usual scorn or whispers. Some students offered her polite nods. Others smiled, and though it wasn't much, it was enough to keep the fire of her newfound confidence alive. But just as she was about to enter her first class, she was stopped by a voice she didn't recognize. Elena, wait up. She turned to see a girl from her math class rushing toward her, a warm smile on her face. Elena blinked in surprise. She knew the girl's face, but they hadn't spoken much before. Her name was Lisa, and she had always kept to herself, usually blending into the background like Elena once had. Hi, Lisa, Elena said, unsure of what was going on. What's up? I just wanted to say, I saw how you handled things yesterday with Rachel. Lisa's eyes sparkled with admiration. That was really brave. I've been meaning to talk to you, actually. Elena was taken aback. She had never thought of herself as brave, at least not until recently. But hearing Lisa's words made her realize something. People were watching. Not everyone was against her. Not everyone was in on the gossip and the cruelty. Some were actually paying attention to her strength. Thanks, Elena replied, her voice soft. I didn't think I was doing anything special. Just trying to stay calm. Lisa smiled again, her expression warming. No, it's more than that. You're showing people that they can't just walk all over you. You're standing up for yourself. Elena was stunned. She hadn't expected this. She had assumed that people like Lisa, who kept to themselves, would never care about what was happening to someone like her. But there it was, the unspoken support from someone who understood. Before Elena could respond, the bell rang, signaling the start of class. I'll see you later, Elena, Lisa said, turning to head in the opposite direction. Elena stood there for a moment, her mind reeling. She hadn't expected anyone to take notice of her courage, least of all someone like Lisa. But this small interaction had given her even more of the confidence she needed. Maybe there was more hope for this school than she had thought. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Elena was more focused than ever, her mind sharp and her determination even sharper. She didn't let any sideways glances or whispered comments from students bother her. Instead, she concentrated on her work, her classmates, and her own personal growth. By lunch, Elena was walking toward the cafeteria when she was met with an unexpected sight. Rachel. The girl was sitting with a group of friends, but this time there was something different about her. Instead of the usual sneer or cruel comments, she seemed quieter, almost uncomfortable. Elena wasn't sure what to make of it. Rachel hadn't said a word to her since their confrontation the day before, and now, she wasn't sure if it was the silence that was more unsettling than the usual taunts. But then, something shifted. Rachel's gaze caught Elena's from across the room. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. And then, in a move that surprised Elena, Rachel gave her a subtle nod. It wasn't an apology, not by a long shot, but it was something. It was a recognition, maybe even a sign that Elena had made an impact. She didn't need Rachel's approval, but this small act of acknowledgement felt like progress. Elena didn't wait around to see if Rachel would speak. Instead, she moved past the table and found a seat with Lisa and a few other girls who had started to sit together in the cafeteria. They greeted her with smiles, and for the first time in weeks, Elena felt like she was truly part of something. The rest of the day went by uneventfully. There were still moments when Elena felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, times when the whispers would start again, or when someone's glance would linger a little too long. But now, it didn't seem as important. She was growing stronger, learning to handle the discomfort without letting it break her. As she walked home that afternoon, her thoughts turned to her conversation with Lisa. For the first time in a while, Elena wasn't just thinking about surviving high school. She was starting to think about the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of woman she wanted to grow into. And no matter how hard the road ahead might be, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, define her. Not now, not ever. The rain had stopped by the time Elena got home, but the clouds still loomed overhead, casting a gray shadow over the town. Elena felt the weight of the day on her shoulders, but it was a different kind of weight now, one that felt more like a challenge than an obstacle. She was changing, and with each passing day, the pieces of her new self were beginning to fall into place. When she walked through the front door, her mom was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, her eyes focused on a stack of bills. Elena dropped her backpack on the couch and sat across from her. "Rough day?" her mom asked, not looking up. Elena hesitated. Her mom was a worrier, always quick to ask how things were going, but Elena never quite knew how to answer. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to worry her. Today, though, something had shifted inside her, and she felt like she could be honest. "Not as bad as usual," Elena replied, shrugging. "Actually, it was okay. Different." Her mom set down her coffee cup and finally looked at her, her brow furrowing. "Different how?" Elena leaned back in her chair, thinking. "I don't know. I think I'm finally done being scared of everything. I don't know if it's the right thing, but I'm not hiding anymore." Her mom's face softened, a slow smile forming at the corners of her mouth. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I know it's not easy. I'm still figuring it out," Elena said with a laugh. "But I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." The next day at school, Elena was met with something unexpected. As she walked into the hallway between classes, she saw Rachel waiting by her locker. For a moment, Elena froze, unsure of what to do. She had expected Rachel to continue avoiding her, maybe even to start a new round of bullying. But the girl was standing there, her arms crossed, looking more uncertain than usual. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself, and walked toward her. "What's up?" Elena asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, though her heart was racing. Rachel looked at her, her eyes shifting uncomfortably before meeting Elena's gaze. I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. The words seemed almost forced, but they still carried weight. "The way I treated you, it wasn't right. I don't know. I was scared of how I looked, and I made you the target." Elena blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected this. She had spent so long dreading confrontation, convinced that people like Rachel would never change, that to hear an apology, however awkward and hesitant, was almost too much to process. "Thanks," Elena said after a beat, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't ready to forgive Rachel entirely, but the fact that the girl was willing to admit her wrongs meant something. Rachel nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "You're different now. I've noticed. And I think it's good. I didn't think you'd stand up for yourself like that." Elena smiled, feeling something warm rise inside her. "Yeah, me neither," she said, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but Elena couldn't shake the conversation with Rachel from her mind. She didn't know if this was the start of something new, or if it was just a brief moment of clarity for Rachel. Either way, Elena had made her peace with it. She had done the right thing by standing up for herself, and that was enough. After school, as Elena was walking home, she received a text message from Lisa. The message was simple, but it made Elena pause. "Hey, I was thinking, maybe we should hang out this weekend? Just us. I think it could be fun." Elena smiled to herself, feeling the warmth of the invitation settle in her chest. She hadn't expected to make new friends this quickly, but Lisa had shown her a side of high school that she hadn't seen before. A side that wasn't filled with judgment and cruelty. And now, maybe, there was a chance for something more. Elena quickly typed a response. "I'd like that. Let's do it." She hit send and put her phone in her pocket, her thoughts already turning toward the weekend. There was still a long way to go, but today had been a step forward. Maybe tomorrow would be the same. As she entered her house, she saw her mom sitting on the couch, a bowl of popcorn in hand, watching her favorite TV show. "You look like you're in a good mood," her mom said, raising an eyebrow. "I am," Elena said, her smile wide and genuine. "I'm finally starting to feel like I'm in control of my life." Her mom studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think things are going to be different now," Elena said softly, her heart full of hope. "For both of us." The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences. Elena found herself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose, a feeling that had been missing for so long. She was no longer hiding from the world around her, and that made all the difference. With each small act of defiance, each moment of courage, she felt the weight of the past slipping further away. But the world, as always, had its own plans. It was a Thursday afternoon when Elena received a message that would change everything. She was at her locker, fumbling with the combination, when her phone buzzed. The message was from Lisa. "Can we talk? It's important." Elena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had grown used to Lisa's quick, playful texts, but this one was different. She quickly typed a response. "What's going on?" Lisa's reply came almost immediately. "I don't want to say it over text. Meet me at the park after school." Elena's mind raced as she tucked the phone back in her pocket. What could it be? Was Lisa in trouble? Or was something else going on? She couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, and Elena found herself walking toward the park with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Her thoughts swirled as she passed familiar streets and faces. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to shift, something to change. When she reached the park, she saw Lisa sitting on a bench near the swing set, her posture tense, her eyes distant. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she approached. "Lisa, what's going on?" Elena asked, sitting beside her. Lisa turned toward her, her face pale, her eyes red from what looked like hours of quiet crying. "I don't know how to say this," Lisa whispered, her voice breaking slightly, "but I need to tell you something, and I don't know if you'll understand. It's about my dad." Elena's eyebrows furrowed. She had heard bits and pieces about Lisa's father, but she had never asked too many questions. It seemed like a sensitive subject. "Lisa, whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm your friend," Elena reassured her. Lisa took a deep breath before speaking again, her words coming out in a rush. "My dad's been in trouble for a while now. I didn't know how bad it was until recently, but I think he's been hiding things from me. He's involved in something dangerous, something I can't ignore anymore." Elena felt a chill creep down her spine. What kind of trouble? Lisa looked at her, her eyes full of regret and fear. "I think he's mixed up with the wrong people. I don't know if he's been forced into it, or if he's just too scared to leave, but I found out he owes money to people who aren't exactly nice. And now they're threatening me, threatening us if he doesn't pay up." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The situation sounded worse than anything she had ever imagined. Lisa's family was always so put together, so perfect on the outside. The idea that her dad was involved in something criminal seemed impossible. "Lisa, what do we do?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Lisa admitted, her voice shaking. "I'm scared. I don't know how to help him, and I don't know who to turn to." Elena thought for a moment, her mind racing. There was no way they could just ignore this, not with the danger hanging over Lisa's head. But what could they do? "I'm here for you, okay?" Elena said, putting a hand on her friend's shoulder. "We'll figure it out. We'll find a way to fix this." Lisa looked at her, the first flicker of hope in her eyes. "You really mean that?" "Of course," Elena said, nodding firmly. "We're in this together." The next few days were a whirlwind of action. Elena and Lisa spent their afternoons in quiet conversation, trying to figure out their next steps. Elena's mind kept circling back to her conversation with Rachel, and the apology that had felt so foreign at the time. Maybe things could change, maybe people could change. But as Elena spent more time with Lisa, the stakes felt higher. Lisa's father's problems weren't just her own. They were pulling both girls into something much bigger than either of them could have anticipated. On Friday night, as Elena sat at her kitchen table, her mind full of questions and fears, she received another text message, this one from her mom. "Elena, can you come to the living room? We need to talk." Her stomach dropped as she stood up. Was something wrong? She had been so caught up in Lisa's situation that she hadn't even thought about what might be happening at home. When she entered the living room, she found her mom sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was pale, and her eyes held the same kind of worry Elena had seen in them earlier. "Mom, what's wrong?" Elena asked, her voice laced with concern. Her mom sighed, her expression filled with uncertainty. "Elena, I don't want to alarm you, but something's been going on at work. I've been hearing rumors, and I don't know how to say this, but we might be in danger." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. What kind of danger? Her mom looked at her, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the people your father used to work with, the ones he owed money to. I thought they had disappeared when he left, but now they've resurfaced. They're looking for him." Elena froze, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Her father's past, something she had thought was long behind them, was now threatening everything she had worked so hard to build. And suddenly, Elena realized that the fight for her future wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone she loved, everyone she cared about. And if she wanted to protect them, she would have to face her fears head-on. Elena's world is changing, and now, with danger closing in, she must take bold steps to protect herself and her family. But will she be able to handle the weight of this new threat? The weight of her mother's words settled over Elena like a heavy blanket, stifling and suffocating. Her father's past had always been a shadow, something that hovered in the periphery of their lives. Elena had always known there were secrets, but she had never imagined they would reach this far, this deep into her present. Her mom sat across from her, her hands trembling in her lap as she looked down at the floor. Elena couldn't read the expression on her face. Was it fear, shame, or something else entirely? "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was struggling to wrap her mind around everything that had just been revealed. "I didn't want to worry you," her mom said, her voice thick with regret. "I thought it was all behind us. I thought we were safe." But Elena knew better. Safety had always been an illusion, a fleeting sense of calm that could vanish in an instant. She had seen it with her own eyes. How quickly things could spiral out of control, how easily life could shift from ordinary to extraordinary, from stable to dangerous. "What do we do now?" Elena asked, her voice hardening with determination. She wasn't about to let fear paralyze her. She had already come this far, had already fought too much for her own peace, for her own future, to back down now. Her mom's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a moment, they were the same age, both staring into an uncertain future. "I don't know," she said softly, but Elena could hear the fear beneath the words. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." Elena wasn't so sure. The people her father had been involved with weren't the kind of people you could outsmart or outrun. She could feel the danger closing in, the heavy presence of something dark and powerful on the horizon. A few moments passed in silence, and Elena stood up abruptly, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She needed to act, to take control of the situation before it spiraled even further out of hand. But what could she do? "I have to see Lisa," Elena said suddenly. She didn't wait for her mother's response, grabbing her jacket and heading out the door. The cold air hit her like a slap to the face, and for a moment, she almost faltered. But she couldn't stop now. Not when things were so close to breaking open. The walk to Lisa's house felt like it took forever. The streets were quieter than usual, the night air thick with the smell of wet earth and leaves. Elena's thoughts kept racing, her mind spinning with the weight of her conversation with her mom. How could they fight something so big? What could they possibly do? When she finally reached Lisa's house, she found her standing in the front yard, pacing nervously. Her face was drawn, her eyes wide with the same fear Elena had seen earlier. "Lisa," Elena called out, her voice full of urgency. "We need to talk." Lisa stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening when she saw Elena. Without a word, she crossed the yard, meeting Elena halfway. "What's going on?" Elena asked, her heart pounding. "What do we do?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted, her voice cracking. "But I'm scared, Elena. I'm really scared. I don't know who to trust anymore." Elena grabbed her friend's shoulders, trying to steady her. "We don't have to face this alone. We can figure it out together." Lisa nodded, though the fear in her eyes didn't dissipate. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about standing up for ourselves. Maybe it's time we did." Elena stared at her, surprised. "You mean?" Lisa swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. "I mean we can't wait around for someone else to fix this. We have to take action. We have to make sure we're safe. But more than that, we have to stop running from the truth." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen Lisa so determined, so focused. Maybe it was the same fire that had been burning inside Elena all this time. The desire to fight, to stand up and say enough was enough. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," Lisa said softly, her eyes searching Elena's. Elena squeezed her shoulders reassuringly. "You are. We both are. We'll face whatever comes together." But as she said the words, Elena knew it wasn't going to be that simple. They were up against forces far greater than they could possibly imagine. There was danger on all sides, and even though they were ready to fight, Elena felt the shadow of doubt creeping in. The question remained, how far would they go to protect themselves? How far were they willing to push before they lost everything? Elena didn't sleep that night. Her mind kept spinning, turning over every possible outcome, every decision she might have to make in the coming days. Her father's past, Lisa's family troubles, her own fight for a better future. All of it seemed to be colliding into a single, inevitable moment. By morning, Elena had made her decision. She would fight. She would fight for herself, for Lisa, for her mother. And no matter what happened, she wouldn't back down. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. "I'm going to need help," Elena whispered to herself as she stood in front of the mirror, her face set with determination. The next few days felt like a blur of decisions, of whispered conversations, of plotting in shadows. Elena's resolve had hardened, but the weight of what she was about to do weighed heavily on her shoulders. Every step forward felt like it could be the one that tipped everything over the edge. She had made a promise to herself to never back down again. But promises were fragile things, especially when they led you into the heart of a storm. Her phone buzzed as she walked to the bus stop the next morning. It was a message from Lisa. "Meet me after school. I've got a plan." Elena's heart quickened. Whatever Lisa had cooked up, it wasn't going to be simple. She didn't respond, knowing that time would reveal what Lisa was thinking. But her mind raced with the possibilities. She had already thought of several ways to take action, but the question was, where would they start? Who could they trust? The bell rang at school, marking the end of the final class. Elena grabbed her bag and hurried to the exit, her mind still racing. She found Lisa waiting near the gate, her face pale, her expression serious. "What's going on?" Elena asked, stopping in front of her. "You said you had a plan." Lisa glanced around nervously before pulling Elena into a quieter corner of the parking lot. "I've been talking to some people," Lisa whispered, her eyes scanning the area. "We can't just sit here and wait for things to get worse. We need leverage. Something big." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Leverage? What are you talking about?" "Something that'll make them listen to us," Lisa said, lowering her voice even further. "We need to expose the truth about your dad, about everything. People need to know what's really going on." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought about confronting the truth, but taking that first step meant risking everything she had. It meant stepping into a fight that might be impossible to win. "You want us to expose him?" Elena asked, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Lisa nodded. "We don't have a choice anymore. If we don't do it now, we'll just keep running. And we can't keep running forever. Elena wanted to argue, to tell her that it was too dangerous, that they weren't ready for this. But deep down, she knew Lisa was right. They couldn't just sit in the shadows and wait for something to happen. They had to make it happen. But how? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. How do we even start? Lisa pulled out her phone and showed Elena a message, a picture of a document, one that could change everything. It was an official report, one that linked her father to a series of financial transactions that no one had ever known about. If they could get it into the right hands, it would be enough to expose the web of lies he had built. This is it, Lisa said. This is what we need to make sure they listen. Elena stared at the screen, feeling a mix of horror and disbelief. It wasn't just her father's past that was at stake now. It was everything. His secrets, their safety, their future. All of it could come crashing down in a single moment. But she had already made her decision. We do this, Elena said, her voice steady. But we do it on our terms. We don't let anyone use us. We make the rules. Lisa looked at her, a faint smile playing at the edges of her lips. I knew you'd say that. Elena felt her stomach tighten, the weight of the decision settling in. They were already in too deep. There was no turning back now. Later that night, Elena sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop. The room was dark except for the glow of the screen, and her thoughts were a swirl of chaos. What had she gotten herself into? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she drafted a message, one that could change everything. She was about to reach out to a contact she hadn't thought about in years, someone who had once been close to her father's world but had fallen off the radar. If anyone knew how to navigate the murky waters of her father's past, it was this person. Elena hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Could she really trust anyone in this world? But the longer she sat there, the more certain she became. She couldn't fight this battle alone. If they were going to have any chance at exposing the truth, she needed help. Real help. She pressed send. The next few days passed in a blur of secrecy. Elena and Lisa kept their heads down at school, pretending everything was normal while their minds raced with thoughts of what they were about to do. But normal was a thing of the past. The world they knew was shifting, and they were at the center of it. Finally, the reply came. Elena opened the message, her heart pounding in her chest. It was from someone she hadn't expected, her father's former business partner. The message was simple, direct. I know what you're after. I'll help, but it won't come cheap. Meet me tomorrow at midnight. Don't bring anyone. Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever happened next, she knew they were about to step into a world far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The clock ticked down to midnight, each passing second tightening the grip of anticipation in Elena's chest. She had spent the day wrestling with the enormity of what she was about to do. The weight of the choices she'd made felt unbearable, but there was no turning back now. Elena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her jacket. Her reflection seemed distant, unfamiliar. Was this the same girl who had once wanted nothing more than to be left alone, to fade into the background? Now, she was about to confront the very man who had helped build the empire her father ruled. She grabbed her phone and shot a quick message to Lisa. I'm leaving now. I'll be fine. Lisa's reply was swift. Be careful. Don't trust anyone. Elena slipped the phone into her pocket and stepped out into the cool night air, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The world felt different at this hour, quieter, more oppressive. Every noise seemed amplified, every rustle of leaves, every distant car engine. A reminder that the world was still moving while she stood frozen, about to take a step into the unknown. The address the business partner had given her was in a part of town she didn't recognize, an industrial area with abandoned buildings and streets that seemed to stretch on forever. She felt the weight of every step she took, the echo of her footsteps like a countdown to the unknown. When she arrived at the warehouse, the lights were dim, casting an eerie glow across the cracked concrete. The door creaked as it opened, and she stepped inside, her heart racing. She had expected something like this, isolated, remote, a place where no one could hear you scream. You're late, a voice called out from the shadows. Elena froze, instinctively reaching for the phone in her pocket. The man stepped into the light, his face partially obscured by a hood, his features hard to read. But Elena recognized the voice. It was him, the business partner who had once been her father's closest ally. "You're the one who contacted me," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm here. What do you want?" The man smirked, his eyes glinting with a cold amusement. "What do I want? You came here to ask for my help, didn't you?" He stepped closer, his movements calculated, as if every inch of space between them mattered. Elena stood her ground, though the uneasy feeling in her stomach refused to dissipate. "I came here to get answers. I know what you're hiding, and I want to know why. You were part of it. You knew what was happening. Why did you help him?" The man laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the empty warehouse. "You think I'm the one who did this? Your father is a businessman, Elena. He does what's necessary. You think I could stand in his way? He promised me a piece of the pie, and I took it. You think I didn't deserve it?" Elena's mind raced. This was not the conversation she had expected. She had thought she would get answers, some explanation that would make sense of everything. Instead, she was faced with a man who seemed almost indifferent to the destruction her father had caused. "You didn't answer my question," Elena pressed. "Why help him? What was in it for you?" The man's face darkened. "I told you. I got what I was owed. But your father, he's not the same man he used to be. I'm not the only one who's had enough. You have no idea the kind of people you're dealing with." A chill ran down Elena's spine. "What are you talking about?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're the only one who's noticed what your father's been doing? There are others, people who want him gone, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "You're not helping me. You're just using me to get back at him." The man smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who had already won. "Maybe, maybe not. But either way, I'll be here when it all falls apart. And trust me, Elena, it will fall apart." He stepped back, and with a flick of his hand, the door to the warehouse creaked open. "If you want what you came for, you'll find it in the back. But be careful, little girl. You're playing a dangerous game now." Elena hesitated, but only for a moment. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She couldn't turn back now, not after everything she had sacrificed to get here. She moved past him, towards the back of the warehouse, where the truth, her truth, awaited. The air grew colder as she moved deeper into the shadows, the walls pressing in around her. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the stacks of old boxes and rusted equipment. At the far end of the room, a desk sat, covered in files, papers, and a single glowing computer screen. Elena's hands shook as she approached the desk. She didn't know what she expected to find, but she knew she had to search. The documents on the desk were scattered in disarray, as if someone had left in a hurry. She quickly scanned through them, her heart racing as the words on the papers began to make sense. There, among the jumble of financial reports and handwritten notes, was a file marked with her father's name. Elena's breath hitched. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the pages, each word more damning than the last. The evidence was there. Everything she had suspected, everything she had feared, laid out in cold, hard fact. Her father had been more than just a businessman. He had been part of a much darker, more dangerous game than Elena had ever realized. But as she absorbed the full weight of what she had uncovered, a thought began to form in the back of her mind. She wasn't the only one who knew now, and if she wasn't careful, someone else might use this information before she did. Elena's mind raced as she stared at the file in front of her. The evidence was irrefutable. Every document, every contract, every shady deal her father had ever been involved in lay before her. She had hoped for a clue, maybe even some kind of small confession that would help her understand the depths of his corruption. But this was something else entirely. This was proof of betrayal on a scale she could scarcely comprehend. Her pulse quickened as she sifted through the pages, trying to make sense of it all. There were accounts from shell companies, offshore bank accounts, and even a few names she recognized. But it wasn't just the financial dealings that struck her. It was the connection to something darker. People, powerful people, were involved. People who could not only ruin her father but destroy anyone who got in their way. As her eyes scanned the final pages of the file, she saw a name she didn't expect. Dante Herrera. The name sent a shockwave through her chest. Dante was a figure shrouded in mystery, a known criminal who had connections in every dark corner of the world. She'd heard whispers of him during her childhood, stories her father had always dismissed as nothing more than rumors. Elena had never thought much about him until now, but seeing his name in connection with her father, it made her blood run cold. She slammed the file shut, suddenly feeling the weight of the room press down on her. The stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. If her father was tied to someone like Dante, it meant her entire world had been a lie, a carefully constructed empire built on greed, manipulation, and fear. But Elena wasn't done yet. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let fear paralyze her now. Just as she was about to leave, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Her instincts kicked in, and she reached for her phone, fingers trembling. But before she could dial, the shadow stepped into the light, revealing the last person she expected to see. Lisa. Elena froze. Her heart skipped a beat. How had she gotten here? And why was she looking at her with such a grim expression? "I know what you're doing," Lisa said, her voice low, her eyes flickering to the file in Elena's hands. "And I'm not sure I should be helping you anymore." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? I'm not the one who's hiding secrets here." "He is," she said, nodding to the file. "You knew about this too, didn't you?" Lisa's gaze hardened. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." Elena took a step forward, her voice rising with frustration. "Then explain it to me. All these years, you've been working for him, covering his tracks. You've been a part of this. So don't stand there acting like you're some kind of saint." Lisa stepped back, her face showing no emotion. "I never said I was a saint, but I'm trying to protect you. The truth you think you're chasing is dangerous. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Elena." The tension between them crackled, and for a moment, all Elena could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. She had trusted Lisa, had even come to think of her as an ally. But now, as the pieces of this twisted puzzle came together, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. "You've been protecting me?" Elena said bitterly. "By letting me walk straight into this mess?" Lisa took a deep breath. "There are things you don't know, and if you keep digging, you won't like the answers. I'm telling you this because I care about you. If you want to survive this, you need to stop now." Elena's gaze narrowed. "You think I'm going to stop now? After everything I've found? You think I can just go back to pretending everything's fine?" Her voice was almost a whisper, heavy with disbelief. Lisa's face softened for a moment, a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, passing across her features. "I wish it were that simple, Elena. But if you push this any further, you won't just be exposing your father. You'll be exposing yourself. And I can't let that happen." Elena's eyes darted back to the file on the desk, her mind spinning. She had no choice but to follow the trail, but Lisa's warning lingered in her ears. Was she being reckless? Could she trust anyone now, even the people who claimed to want to help? "What are you saying?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you with me? Or are you working against me?" For a long moment, Lisa said nothing, her face unreadable. Elena could see the struggle in her eyes, the inner conflict that was tearing her apart. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm saying you need to make a choice, Elena. A dangerous one. You want to bring down your father? Fine. But be prepared for the fallout. Because there's no going back after this." Elena felt a cold chill wrap around her heart. She had no illusions about the consequences now. It wasn't just about her father's empire anymore. It was about survival. "You're right," Elena said, her voice steady now, though the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. "There's no going back." Lisa gave her a long, hard look before nodding. "Then we need to move fast. They'll be coming for you, whether you're ready or not. And you can't do this alone." Elena hesitated, then nodded in agreement. "Who else knows? Who's really behind this?" Lisa's expression darkened. "I don't know all the details, but I can guess. There are whispers. Dante is only the tip of the iceberg. You're dealing with more than just your father's business associates. The people you're up against, they have power, influence, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way. Elena took a deep breath. Then let's destroy them first. Elena sat in the cold, sterile conference room, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wooden table. The tension in the air was suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. She had already made her decision, but the weight of it, the consequences, pressed down on her chest, threatening to crush her resolve. She could feel the shadows of those watching her, waiting for her to make the next move, but she couldn't afford hesitation. Not now. Lisa had been quiet since they'd left the office, and Elena couldn't help but notice the change in her demeanor. The once trusted ally now seemed more like a ghost, someone who was already half gone, caught between the past and the present. Elena had trusted her, but now that trust was faltering. Was Lisa really on her side? Or had she been playing a deeper game all along? Do you have it? Elena asked, her voice steady but laced with impatience. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the answer. Lisa slid a manila envelope across the table. Elena didn't waste any time. She ripped it open, pulling out the contents with a mix of urgency and dread. Inside were a series of photographs and documents, images of meetings, locations, and people she hadn't seen before. The names of several high-profile individuals were scribbled across the papers. Some were politicians. Others were business tycoons. All of them had one thing in common. They were involved with her father, and they were tangled in the web of deceit she had uncovered. Her stomach churned as she flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling. One name caught her eye immediately, Clara Montgomery. The last time Elena had heard that name was at her father's memorial, where Clara had given a eulogy, one that was dripping with insincere sympathy. She had always seemed too polished, too perfect, but Elena had brushed it off, too consumed with grief to question the details. Now, seeing her name on this list, Elena's blood ran cold. Clara had been more than just an acquaintance. She had been involved in the core of the operation, working alongside her father and Dante. The ties between them were deep, and Elena realized that Clara might know more about the darkness inside her father's world than anyone else. "Why didn't you tell me about her?" Elena asked, her voice low but firm. "You knew she was involved, didn't you?" Lisa flinched, her gaze flickering. "I didn't know the extent of it," she admitted, her voice softer than Elena had ever heard it. "I knew she was close to your father, but this?" She shook her head. "This is beyond what I expected. I never thought she'd be involved with Dante." Elena leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. Clara was the last piece of the puzzle she needed, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized how dangerous this game had become. She was no longer just fighting for justice, she was fighting for her life. Her father's empire was far more corrupt than she had ever imagined, and now the people who had once been close to her were standing on the other side. Lisa's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to be careful, Elena. Clara's a dangerous player. She's not like the others. She's smart, ruthless, and she has connections that you don't even know about." Elena met her gaze. "I can handle it." Lisa's eyes darkened. "You don't understand. Clara's connected to people who can make this whole thing disappear in the blink of an eye. You think your father was the worst of it? Think again. There are forces at play here that you can't fight alone." A chill ran through Elena as she absorbed Lisa's words. Could she truly stand up against this? Was she walking straight into a trap? The more she thought about it, the more her mind screamed at her to back away. But there was no going back now. If she stopped, if she let fear take over, everything she had uncovered would have been for nothing. "Then I won't fight alone," Elena said, her voice cold with determination. "We're taking her down, and I won't stop until I have everything, until I have the truth." The next day, Elena found herself standing in front of Clara's office building, staring up at the glass and steel monument to power and greed. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue over the building's sleek exterior, but inside, Elena knew the truth. The truth was dark, and it was hidden behind the perfectly polished walls of the empire Clara had helped build. She stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she made her way to the elevator. Her heart pounded in her chest, and with each step, the weight of what she was about to do settled more heavily on her shoulders. But there was no turning back. She wasn't the scared little girl she had once been, hiding in the shadows of her father's empire. She was stronger now, more determined, and she would see this through to the end, no matter what it cost her. The elevator doors opened, and Elena stepped out onto the top floor. Clara's office was just ahead, its glass doors wide open, as though inviting Elena in. She didn't hesitate, walking straight toward it with purpose. Clara was sitting behind her desk, her back to the door, oblivious to Elena's arrival. The air between them felt charged with anticipation, and as Elena approached, Clara finally turned, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of her. "Elena," Clara said, her voice smooth and calculating. "I didn't expect you so soon." Elena stopped just in front of the desk, the file she had been carrying now tightly gripped in her hands. "I know what you've been doing, Clara, and I'm here to put an end to it." Clara's smile never wavered, but Elena could see the flicker of something cold behind her eyes. "You don't know what you're up against," Clara said, "but you will." Elena's lips curled into a hard smile. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The battle lines have been drawn, and Elena is about to confront her greatest adversary yet. Will Clara try to take her down, or will Elena finally expose the empire built on lies? The tension in Clara's office was almost palpable, as if the very air between Elena and Clara was charged with a current waiting to snap. Elena stood, unwavering, but her pulse raced beneath the surface. She had the upper hand, but the feeling was temporary. Clara was no stranger to this kind of game. The woman sitting before her had survived decades in the ruthless world of business and power. She wouldn't be easily taken down. "You've gathered your evidence," Clara said, her voice a smooth purr, a stark contrast to the fire burning inside Elena. "But what do you think you'll do with it? Do you really believe you can topple everything I've built? What you're holding is just a piece of paper. It won't protect you from the consequences of your actions." Elena didn't flinch. She hadn't come here to make threats. She had come to take back what was hers. "You've underestimated me, Clara," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not the scared girl you think I am. I'm not afraid of losing everything. I'll burn it all down if I have to." Clara's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're playing with fire, Elena. It's dangerous, even for you." Elena took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She wasn't just here to confront Clara. She was here to make it clear that there was nothing left for her to fear. "This ends now. You've hurt too many people, and I won't let you get away with it." For a moment, Clara said nothing, just stared at her. Then, finally, she let out a soft laugh, as if Elena's words were nothing more than a fleeting amusement. "You think you're the first person to try and bring me down? You think you're the first person who's had enough of my empire?" Her gaze hardened. "I've crushed everyone who's ever tried, and I'll do the same to you." Elena's heart raced, but she didn't back down. This wasn't just a battle for revenge. It was a battle for justice. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. "You won't crush me," she said. "This time, the truth wins." Clara rose from her chair, her eyes burning with a cold fury. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Elena. You're not the one who holds the power here. I am. I always have been." Elena held her ground, the file now clutched tightly in her hand. "Power doesn't last forever, Clara, and you're about to find out just how quickly it can crumble." Clara's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough to show Elena that her words had gotten under her skin. She couldn't afford to let this moment slip away. Now was the time to strike. "You think you can turn the tide with a few pieces of paper?" Clara scoffed. "I've got an army of lawyers, politicians, and businessmen who will make sure this never sees the light of day. You're a fool if you think they'll just let you walk away with a victory." Elena's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to walk away. I just need to make sure the world sees the truth." She slammed the file down on the desk with a force that echoed in the quiet room. The sound seemed to break the tension, and for a moment, Clara looked genuinely shaken. Elena had never seen her so off balance, and the sight fueled her determination. Clara was no longer in control. Not in this room. Clara took a deep breath, regaining her composure. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening into something resembling a mask. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elena," she said, her tone low and deliberate. "But mark my words, it will cost you everything." Elena stood tall, refusing to let fear take hold. "Then I'll pay whatever price it takes." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of their words. Elena knew that what happened next would determine everything. She had nothing left to lose, but Clara did, and that made her dangerous. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice cool and calculating. "You're right about one thing, Elena. This isn't over. But you're not the one who will decide how it ends." As Clara turned away, her heels clicking against the polished floor, Elena's stomach tightened. It was clear now. The real battle was only just beginning, but Elena wasn't about to back down. She had come too far to let fear or doubt take her down now. The storm was coming, and she would be ready. Clara may have her empire, but Elena has the truth, and that's all she needs to bring it crashing down. The stakes are rising, and Elena's next move could be her most dangerous yet. The weight of Clara's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Elena stood in the middle of the opulent office, the silence enveloping her as Clara's figure disappeared behind the grand doors. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was this truly the right path? But then, she remembered why she was here. The countless lives destroyed by Clara's greed, the years of suffering that had been brushed aside by a woman who thought she was untouchable. Elena's resolve hardened. The file on Clara's desk still sat there, an embodiment of her entire plan. It was her weapon, her proof, but in this game of power and deceit, it wasn't enough. She needed more than just facts. She needed leverage. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket, shaking her from her thoughts. She pulled it out quickly, a wave of tension rising in her chest. It was a message from Lucas. "They're moving faster than we expected. You need to make your next move, Elena. The evidence won't hold them off for long." Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. The timing was crucial. If Clara made one wrong move, the whole operation could be compromised, and Elena's chance at redemption would slip through her fingers like sand. She had to act. With one final glance at the door to Clara's office, Elena walked out, feeling the weight of the mission pressing on her. She knew she couldn't face Clara directly again. Not yet. But she had other allies, and it was time to call in a favor. Lucas was waiting for her in the dimly lit cafe, his hands clasped around a steaming mug of coffee. As Elena slid into the chair across from him, he didn't immediately look up. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind that only came when both people were playing a game where the stakes were life and death. "How's it looking?" Elena asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper above the low murmur of other patrons. She had to be careful. Clara had eyes everywhere. Lucas finally met her gaze, his eyes dark with concern. "They're on to us. The people Clara has in place are starting to ask questions. I've been trying to keep things under the radar, but it's only a matter of time before they realize we're making moves." Elena nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to back down now, not when everything she'd worked for was on the line. "We don't have time to waste. We need to act fast." Lucas leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower. "There's a meeting tonight. Clara's closest allies are gathering at her penthouse. It's the perfect opportunity to get in and gather more intel. I can get you inside." Elena's heart skipped a beat. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the kind of risk she had to take. There were no guarantees left in this fight, only the choice to keep moving forward or to fall. "Get me in," she said with certainty, the weight of her decision clear in her voice. "I'll take care of the rest." As the night fell, the streets outside Clara's penthouse were eerily quiet, the only sounds the occasional hum of a car passing by. Elena's nerves buzzed with anticipation. Lucas had pulled strings to get her access, but now it was up to her to outmaneuver everyone in that room. The penthouse was a fortress, security cameras, guards, the works. But Elena had spent enough time studying Clara's patterns to know where the cracks were. She donned a sleek, black outfit, blending into the shadows, as she approached the entrance. Lucas had given her a small earpiece to stay in contact, But there was no turning back once she walked through that door. Every second counted. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an eternity. Elena's palms were sweaty, her breath shallow. She'd been in tight spots before, but this was different. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone Clara had crushed beneath her heel. The elevator doors slid open, and Elena stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. The room before her was luxurious, elegant, and full of danger. Clara's allies were gathered around a massive, glossy table, their voices rising in animated discussion. She had made it. The challenge now was getting what she needed, without being caught. Elena moved quietly, her steps careful, but her mind was sharp. Every conversation she overheard, every whisper between Clara's inner circle, brought her closer to the evidence she needed to take the final shot. Elena! The voice came from behind her, cold and steady. She froze, her body tensing. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Clara's voice had a certain bite to it, a power that couldn't be ignored. "What are you doing here?" Clara's tone was dangerous, but there was no fear in Elena's eyes as she slowly turned to face her. "I'm here to finish what you started," Elena said, her voice unwavering. "You won't win this time, Clara." Clara's smile faltered, just for a moment. "You think you can expose me with a few documents?" Her voice was low, a warning. "You think you can walk out of here with your life?" Elena stood tall, unflinching. "I don't need to walk away, Clara. I'm not afraid of you anymore." The silence between them was deafening. Then, Clara's eyes narrowed, calculating. "We'll see about that." Elena's heart raced as Clara's piercing gaze locked onto her, but she refused to let the tension rattle her. This wasn't the time for hesitation. This was the moment that would determine everything. Clara took a deliberate step closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You think you can beat me with a handful of documents and a bit of bravado?" Her voice was low and dangerous, each word dripping with disdain. "I built this empire from the ground up, and you think you can take it down in one night?" Elena stood her ground, fighting the urge to step back. Her mind was sharp, calculating, knowing every second mattered now. "It's not about taking you down, Clara," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "It's about giving the people you've crushed a chance at justice." Clara's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Justice?" She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You've been fooled, Elena. You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't understand." With a sudden movement, Clara turned and motioned to the guards standing at the far end of the room. Elena's pulse quickened. There were too many of them, and too many ways this could go wrong. She was one step away from being trapped in Clara's web. But there was no turning back now. "Seize her," Clara commanded coldly. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Elena's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass decanter from the table, and hurled it at the nearest guard. It shattered with a deafening crash, the guard momentarily stunned. She sprinted toward the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The earpiece crackled in her ear. Lucas' voice was sharp with urgency. "Elena, go now. The elevator's clear. Just get to the lobby." But as she neared the exit, Clara's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "Don't let her escape." The guards were closing in, and Elena's window of escape was closing fast. She pushed herself harder, the pounding of her heart echoing in her ears. The elevator was just ahead, but there were too many barriers between her and freedom. In a flash of desperation, she turned sharply, ducking into a narrow hallway. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder by the second. She needed a way out, a way to get what she came for without getting caught. And then, she remembered. At the far end of the hallway was a small, nondescript door. No guards, no cameras. It was a chance, and she had no other choice but to take it. She darted toward the door and twisted the handle. It was locked. Her pulse spiked. The guards were closing in. Desperation surged through her, and she threw her shoulder into the door with all her might. It gave way, the lock breaking with a loud snap. She was inside. The room was small and unremarkable, filled with crates and what appeared to be old storage equipment. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy her a few precious moments. Elena breathed heavily, her mind racing. She could hear the guards shouting, their voices muffled outside the door. But there was no time to wait. If she was going to make this count, she needed to act quickly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fumbled to pull it out. Lucas' message was waiting. The exit's compromised. They'll have everything locked down in minutes. You need to move now. She glanced around the cramped room and spotted a small window near the ceiling. It was a tight fit, but it was her only chance. Without a second thought, Elena grabbed a crate and stacked it beneath the window. She climbed up, her muscles straining as she squeezed through the narrow opening. Her heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else as she dropped to the ground outside. She was free, at least for now. The city streets outside were dark, the hum of traffic a distant murmur. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted through the alleyways, her body moving on instinct. She couldn't stop. Not yet. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. "Lucas, did you get what you needed?" he asked, his voice urgent. Elena's chest tightened as she glanced over her shoulder. "Not yet. I'm still in the clear, but I need to get back to the office. I can't risk anything getting into Clara's hands." "Understood," Lucas replied. "I'll keep an eye on the exits. You'll have support. Just stay sharp." "I will," Elena said, determination hardening her tone. "This ends tonight." Back at her temporary office, the weight of the night's events settled over her. She had narrowly escaped, but the real battle was just beginning. The file she had stolen from Clara's penthouse was more than just a few documents. It was the key to exposing everything. Every dirty deal, every secret Clara had tried to bury. But now, Elena had to make sure the world would see it. She couldn't let Clara bury it. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Elena hesitated before opening it. When she did, her stomach dropped. "You think you're the only one playing this game? Your move is already known. We're watching." Elena stared at the message for a long moment, her heart pounding. Clara wasn't just watching her. Someone else was too. With Clara closing in and a shadowy new enemy entering the game, Elena's struggle has reached a new level of danger. Who can she trust now? Elena's fingers trembled as she stared at the cryptic message. The words on the screen seemed to blur in her vision, each syllable dripping with a promise of danger. Her mind raced, but one thought stood out above all others. She was no longer just facing Clara. There was someone else out there, someone watching her every move. A cold sweat broke out across her back as she closed her phone, trying to steady her breath. She had to think. She couldn't panic. "Who's playing me?" Elena muttered under her breath, pacing the small office. The room, once a sanctuary of strategy and planning, now felt like a cage. She couldn't stay here long. The walls felt as though they were closing in on her. She pulled up the file she had stolen from Clara's penthouse, spreading it across the table. Every document she had scanned was there. Every illegal transaction, every bribed politician, every shady deal made in the darkness. But none of it mattered if she didn't get it to the right people. The authorities? They could be compromised. Her team? They were trustworthy, but could they handle the storm that was coming? There was no one she could trust fully, not even Lucas, who had been her ally in this fight. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she didn't hesitate. The number was familiar. "Lucas." "Elena, we need to talk." "It's not safe for you to be on your own right now," he said, his voice low but urgent. "What do you mean?" "I'm fine," Elena snapped, her eyes darting around the room. "No, you're not. We've traced the number that sent you the message. It's a burner phone, no traceable details. But the location, Elena, it's too close to home. Someone's already on the move. We need to get you out of there," Lucas insisted. "I'm not running," Elena said, gritting her teeth. "I've come too far to back down now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Lucas spoke again, quieter this time. "I understand, but if you stay, you're walking into a trap. They know where you are. It's only a matter of time before they come for you." She could hear the urgency in his voice. He wasn't just concerned for her safety, he was afraid for both of them. Elena ran her hand through her hair, frustration mounting. She couldn't just hide. Not when everything she had worked for was within her grasp. But the stakes were higher than ever. If she stayed here, if she didn't act fast, she could lose everything. "I'm moving the files," she said finally, her decision made. "You'll meet me at the backup location in an hour. We'll figure this out together." "Elena," Lucas started, but she had already hung up. There was no time for another argument. No time for hesitation. The streetlights outside flickered as Elena stepped into the alley, the weight of the file heavy in her hand. The night air was sharp, the kind that made her skin prickle, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being watched. The message, the phone call, the burn of a presence she couldn't quite place. She needed to move quickly. As she turned a corner, she spotted a figure standing near a car parked along the curb. It was too dark to make out details at first, but Elena's instincts kicked in. She recognized the stance, tall, broad-shouldered. "Lucas?" Elena called, her voice steady but with an edge of caution. The figure turned, and as he stepped into the dim light, she could see the familiar face of Lucas. But something about the look in his eyes made her freeze. His expression was strained, his jaw tight, as though he were holding something back. "Elena," he said, his voice tight, "I think they found us." Before she could respond, the sharp sound of a car engine roared to life nearby. Elena whipped her head toward the noise, heart racing. A black Cadillac, one she didn't recognize, was speeding down the street, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator on the hunt. "It's them," Lucas said, his voice low but full of panic. "Get in the car. Now." Without thinking, Elena grabbed the door handle and slid into the passenger seat of Lucas's car. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle lurched forward, tires screeching against the asphalt as they sped away. But it wasn't enough. The Cadillac was gaining on them, a black shadow in the rearview mirror. "Elena, listen to me," Lucas shouted as he swerved around a corner, the car fishtailing slightly. "I need you to trust me. We're not just running from Clara anymore. There's someone else, someone bigger, pulling the strings. I've been digging, but I couldn't find enough to warn you. Whoever they are, they're playing both sides." Elena's heart sank. Whoever these people were, they weren't just out to stop her. They were out to eliminate her. The black Cadillac lurched forward, a screech of tires as it slammed into the rear of Lucas's car, sending them spinning out of control. The car slammed into a lamppost, the sound of metal crunching filling the air. "Hold on," Lucas yelled, as he fought to regain control of the vehicle. The Cadillac wasn't letting up. They were close now, closing in for the kill. Elena's mind raced, but her body was already reacting, every instinct telling her what to do. She reached into the back seat and pulled out the emergency bag she had prepared earlier, a device she had secured just for this moment. She didn't have much time. With a trembling hand, she hit a button on the device, sending a pulse of signal interference into the air. The Cadillac screeched to a halt just as the lights flickered and died, the vehicle suddenly dead in its tracks. Lucas let out a breath of relief, but Elena wasn't convinced. She knew this was just the beginning. "We need to go," she said, pulling herself out of the car. "Now." Elena's breath came in ragged gasps as she and Lucas sprinted down the dimly lit alleyway, the air heavy with tension. The black Cadillac had been disabled, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they found a way to fix it. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but her mind was razor-focused. They were too close now. She could almost taste the danger. Lucas glanced over at her, his face drawn with worry. "Do you think they'll follow us?" "They already are," Elena replied, her voice low and steady despite the pounding in her chest. "We can't outrun them forever. We need a plan." "Then let's head to the backup location. It's the only safe place I know," Lucas suggested, his eyes scanning the area nervously. The backup location, an abandoned warehouse just outside the city, had been their emergency rendezvous point. They had used it before, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just the two of them up against the system. They were up against an unknown force, someone with resources and power they couldn't even begin to comprehend. They reached the street corner, where a sleek black car was parked. Elena hesitated, instinctively eyeing the surroundings. If anyone was tailing them, They would have to act fast. Get in. I'll drive, Lucas urged, already opening the door for her. Without a word, Elena slid into the passenger seat, her eyes never leaving the street behind them. Lucas revved the engine, and the car shot forward, weaving through traffic as they made their way out of the city. But as they neared the edge of town, the unease in the pit of Elena's stomach only deepened. Something wasn't right. The streetlights seemed to flicker more than usual, and the familiar hum of the city felt oddly quiet, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Stay sharp, Elena warned, her fingers curling around the seatbelt. Lucas nodded, his hands tightening on the wheel. We're almost there. Just a few more miles. A sudden flash of headlights blinded them, followed by the unmistakable growl of an engine. Elena's heart skipped a beat. It's them, she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. The black Cadillac had reappeared. Lucas swore under his breath. Hold on tight. The car veered sharply as Lucas accelerated, the tires screeching against the asphalt as they sped toward the warehouse. Elena looked over her shoulder, watching in horror as the Cadillac closed the distance between them, the driver relentless in their pursuit. We can't outrun them forever, she said, her mind racing. She needed to make a decision, and fast. As the warehouse came into view, Lucas slammed on the brakes, sending the car skidding into the parking lot. They were just moments ahead of the Cadillac, but Elena knew they wouldn't be safe for long. We need to move, she said urgently. We can't stay here. They both jumped out of the car and ran toward the entrance of the warehouse, the heavy metal doors creaking open as they approached. But just as they stepped inside, Elena heard a noise behind her, footsteps too heavy to be ignored. Without thinking, she grabbed Lucas's arm and yanked him into the shadows. They crouched behind a pile of crates, their breath shallow as they listened. The footsteps drew nearer, echoing through the cavernous space of the warehouse. Elena, what the hell is going on? Lucas asked, his voice hoarse with anxiety. They're after us. And I don't know why, Elena replied, her mind whirling. But I'm starting to think this goes deeper than Clara. Someone else is pulling the strings. The sound of footsteps stopped, and Elena's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't be discovered. But the silence was broken by a cold, mocking voice from the darkness. You're not as clever as you think, Elena. The voice sent a chill down her spine. She recognized it instantly. It was Marco, the man who had always stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elena's blood ran cold as she stepped out from behind the crates, facing him squarely. What do you want, Marco? He stepped into the light, a slow smile creeping across his face. What I want you to understand just how deep you've gotten yourself into. Clara was just a pawn, Elena. You were never supposed to find out the truth. Truth? Elena demanded, her eyes narrowing. What truth? Marco's smile widened. You think this is just about money, about power? No, it's about control. And now, it's your turn to lose it. Before Elena could respond, she heard the sound of engines revving outside the warehouse. A familiar sound. The black Cadillac had arrived, and with it, a dozen armed men. Elena's mind raced. They were trapped. Lucas, we need to get out of here, Elena hissed. But Lucas's face was pale with shock. Where do we go? He asked, his voice trembling. Marco chuckled darkly. Nowhere. You've already lost. The men outside began to spread out, their footsteps heavy and purposeful as they entered the warehouse, guns drawn. Elena felt the weight of their eyes on her, the tension in the air thickening by the second. Marco was right. They had nowhere left to run. But Elena wasn't about to give up without a fight. Get to the back door, she shouted to Lucas, her voice commanding. I'll handle Marco. Lucas hesitated, but Elena's fierce gaze made him nod. Be careful. Elena didn't wait to hear his response. She turned toward Marco, her body braced for whatever came next. She had fought too hard to let him win. Her hand went to the concealed weapon she had tucked into her waistband, ready to face whatever he had planned. Marco's expression darkened as he saw her move. You think you can take me down, Elena? You're too far gone. You're already in over your head. Elena raised the gun, steadying her aim. I'm not afraid of you. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating, each breath a battle. Elena's finger tightened around the trigger, her eyes locked on Marco, whose smile had faded into a cruel sneer. His gaze was calculating, cold, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to fight back. Behind her, the footsteps of the armed men grew louder, the sound of boots against concrete growing closer with each passing second. There was no time to think. There was no time for fear. "Give it up, Elena," Marco said, his voice smooth but dripping with menace. "This is bigger than you. You think you can stop me? You're just a pawn in a much bigger game." Elena's grip tightened on the gun. "Then let's end this, Marco, once and for all." Without warning, she dove to the side, rolling behind a stack of metal crates as gunshots rang out. The warehouse exploded into chaos, the air thick with the sound of ricocheting bullets and shouts. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, her senses on high alert. She didn't have much time. From her hidden position, she could hear Marco barking orders to his men. "Find her. Don't let her escape." Elena didn't need to see them to know they were closing in. They had the advantage. They had the numbers. But Elena had something they didn't: desperation. With a quick glance over her shoulder, she saw Lucas at the far side of the warehouse, crouched behind a set of pipes. He was trying to make his way toward the back door, but Marco's men were positioned at every exit, blocking any route to safety. "Lucas," Elena called out, her voice hoarse. "Get to the door. I'll cover you." Lucas hesitated, fear flashing across his face. "I'm not leaving you. You have to. There's no time," Elena shouted, pushing herself up and firing a shot toward one of the men advancing in her direction. The bullet struck the crate just inches from his head, forcing him to duck behind cover. She didn't wait for him to recover. Elena rushed forward, sprinting toward the far corner of the warehouse, where she knew there was a secondary exit. The armed men didn't expect her to be so fast. They were disoriented, scrambling to adjust. "Elena, no?" Marco's voice echoed through the space. He sounded furious. "This is your last chance." But Elena had already reached the exit. She shoved open the door, bursting into the night air, the cold wind hitting her like a slap to the face. She didn't stop to look back. Every step felt like it could be her last, but she couldn't afford to hesitate now. Behind her, the sounds of the pursuit grew louder. Marco's men had followed, and now they were closing in on her from all sides. But she had a plan. She just needed to hold them off long enough. In the distance, she spotted the black Cadillac, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was parked in front of an old industrial complex, but the vehicle was surrounded by more of Marco's men. Elena's heart sank. She had no choice now. She ducked behind a rusted dumpster, her mind working furiously to come up with a way out. There was no way she could take on all of them. She needed a diversion. Her eyes darted around, spotting a stack of old barrels near a loading dock. She moved quickly, trying to be as silent as possible, and set them up with a plan that would buy her enough time. With a final glance over her shoulder, Elena ran toward the barrels and kicked one loose, sending it tumbling into the street with a loud crash. The noise was enough to distract the men for a split second. That was all she needed. Elena sprinted toward the Cadillac, sliding into the driver's seat before anyone could react. She slammed the door and started the engine. The sound of the motor roaring to life was like a lifeline, a promise of escape. As she put the car into gear, she saw Lucas running toward her, his eyes wide with relief. "Get in," Elena shouted, her foot heavy on the gas. Lucas dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door just as a bullet tore through the air, hitting the side mirror. "Drive," he yelled. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She floored the accelerator, sending the Cadillac screeching forward into the night. The men behind them scrambled to react, but Elena was already several yards ahead, the roar of the engine masking the sound of the gunfire that followed. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the relief of the chase, the weight lifting off her shoulders as they sped away from the warehouse. But that relief was short-lived. She knew this was just the beginning. "Elena," Lucas said, his voice shaky. "What now?" She looked over at him, her hands still gripping the wheel with white knuckles. "Now, we figure out who's really behind this." The city lights flickered in the rearview mirror, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The danger wasn't over, but one thing was certain. Elena was no longer just a pawn in Marco's game. She was the one pulling the strings now, and whoever was behind all of this was going to regret underestimating her. The city blurred around them as Elena floored the accelerator, weaving through traffic with laser focus. Every nerve in her body was alive, pumping with adrenaline. Lucas sat in the passenger seat, his eyes flicking nervously between the rearview mirror and the darkened road ahead. "Elena," Lucas said, his voice tight. "What's the plan? Where are we going?" She didn't look at him. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "We need to go to the safe house. The one we set up last year. Marco's not the only player in this game." Lucas nodded, but he didn't look reassured. He knew the danger they were in, and the tension between them only deepened the more they drove. Elena's mind was working overtime, piecing together every clue, every moment that didn't make sense. They just scratched the surface. They passed through familiar streets, the city she knew like the back of her hand. But tonight, it felt foreign. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if every alleyway, every corner held something waiting to leap out at them. When they reached the safe house, Elena parked the Cadillac behind a dilapidated warehouse, far from the main road. The area was secluded, just as she remembered. "Elena, you sure about this?" Lucas asked, his hand gripping the door handle, his uncertainty clear. She exhaled slowly, taking a moment to collect herself before speaking. "I need to be sure, Lucas. This goes beyond Marco. There's someone else pulling the strings. Someone bigger." Lucas's brow furrowed. "Who?" She hesitated, then pushed the door open. "We're about to find out." They stepped into the cold, musty air of the abandoned building. The inside was dimly lit, the air thick with dust. Elena pulled out her phone, scanning through the messages that had been coming in all night. There was a trail, disjointed, fragmented, but it was enough. "Elena?" Lucas said again, stepping closer, his voice filled with concern. "You're not telling me everything." "Soon," Elena replied, her voice calm, almost distant. She wasn't ready to say the words. Not yet. They moved deeper into the warehouse, where an old desk sat under a flickering light. The table was covered with maps, photographs, and files. Information they had gathered over months, bits and pieces that didn't make sense until now. Elena spread the documents out before them, her mind racing. "There's a man," she muttered, her eyes scanning over the details. "A man who's been pulling strings for years, using Marco as his pawn. His name's Victor Dane. He's the one we're really after." Lucas stepped closer, his brow creased in confusion. "Victor Dane? The name sounds familiar. He's been in the shadows of every major crime syndicate, every corporate takeover. The police have tried to bring him down for years, but he always slips through their fingers." Elena's voice was tight with frustration. "And now, he's got his hands on everything. Marco, the weapons, everything." They both fell silent for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling between them. The game they were playing was bigger than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about stopping a criminal empire before it destroyed everything in its path. "We need to take him down," Lucas said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Once and for all." Elena nodded, pulling out a stack of papers from the drawer. She spread them across the table. There was a map of the city, marked with several locations. These were the final pieces. The safe house was just one of many places where Victor operated. If they were going to take him down, they needed to hit him where it would hurt the most, his power base. "Elena, I know we've been through a lot," Lucas said quietly, "but this is different. This guy is untouchable. How are we supposed to go after someone like that?" She looked at him, the determination in her eyes as sharp as a blade. "We've been playing by their rules for too long, Lucas. Now, we make our own." Her hand hovered over the map, tracing a line that cut through the heart of the city. The coordinates were clear. Victor's headquarters, the final stronghold of his empire. It was heavily guarded, nearly impossible to breach. But Elena knew the only way to stop this was to go straight to the heart of the beast. "Are you with me?" Elena asked, her voice steady. For a moment, Lucas didn't speak. Then he nodded, his eyes hard with the same resolve. I'm with you. The two of them stood there in the silence, surrounded by the remnants of their fight, knowing that this was the final chapter. There was no turning back. I'm going to take Victor down, Elena said, her voice low and dangerous. And I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. They turned and walked out of the warehouse, the sounds of their footsteps echoing in the dark as the city's skyline loomed before them. It was time. The final battle was about to begin.